Okay, so welcome to this second presentation of the Regional Week. Today we're with the Atlantic chapter. Before we start, I just want to thank our sponsors, Roto and Open Janela. And I have a message from Roto for you guys. So Roto North America is proud to present the 2022 Regional Week, and they will feature a webinar per quarter this year, and they will begin with a webinar called Sliding with Roto that is going to be held on February 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to sign up to that webinar, you can visit FenCan's social media and our website. You'll find the links there. So thanks again to our sponsors. Without further ado, I'll have Greg Dickie, or one of our chapters co-chair, introduce you to our guest today.
Thanks, Steph, and good day, everyone. I guess it's the afternoon here on the East Coast, but morning everywhere else. So thanks for joining us today. We've got an exciting lineup to go through a few interesting topics. And the first thing I guess I want to talk about is the excitement we have right now around having our own chapter established as a legal entity. This is something that has been on our agenda for a long time, and it's exciting to be at this moment. It's going to give us a lot of independence to focus on education, regional issues, whatever it might be, in Atlantic Canada. For the most part, Atlantic Canadian fenestration manufacturers would have to participate at the national level, which I encourage folks to continue to do. But now we have a voice right here in our backyard, and really can focus on issues that are really relevant to our region. So that's very exciting. So along with my co-chair here, I guess he's to the right of me right now, Kevin Pelley. He'll talk a little bit about our goals upcoming. Also, we're very fortunate to have the majority of the fenestration manufacturers in Atlantic Canada, and many of the suppliers already part of our committee, or part of our chapter now, I guess we can call ourselves. But we're also very fortunate to have a member of the RAIC, an architect, Greg MacNeil, who's going to speak to us today, as well as a building official out of Rothesay, Steve Nason. So we've got a very unique group here. We're really extending past the fenestration manufacturing side and kind of the direct connects, and really getting right across the supply chain, so to speak. So really exciting times right now to participate. Obviously, Terry Adamson's here, our technical director on support. And we also have Al Jaugelis, who's also going to share some wisdom with us. So welcome, everyone. And I guess I'll hand it over to Kevin. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what we're focused on right now in our newly established chapter. I think you're on mute, Kev. There you go.
Always helps unmute yourself. So I was busy having a sociable here. It is after lunch, but it's we're okay here. So yeah, thanks, Greg. What Greg said, I just want to echo that. We've long in Atlantic Canada supported our national association, but there's always been a bit of a need to have a regional voice. So the regional committees are a great idea, a great initiative. Greg outlined what we sort of, from a 10,000 foot perspective, are looking at, but specifically in Atlantic Canada, a couple things that we're keying in on is developing a simplified NAFs process. I would have said a simplified NAFs document before, but I think you'll hear from our panel today that there's maybe a new way to approach this. So I'm looking forward to that. We're also looking at installation. We have, much like in the BC coast, we have sideways rain here. So we, one of our goals of our committee is to sort of look at a standardized installation guide for Atlantic Canada based on the building code. We want to connect fenestration industry stakeholders. We've had several meetings the last couple of years, and Gregory MacNeil and Steve Nason, Gregory's an architect and Steve's a building official, have been on our committee, and their feedback has been invaluable and has really given us some clear direction on what these key stakeholders are looking for when they're dealing with fenestration products. And then the other thing is we just want to work with our members, build a stronger association, support our national association, and really look at helping them on any issues that come up. So as Greg mentioned, Steve's going to start off with a discussion on from a building official's perspective, and then we're going to have a fireside chat with Al Jaugelis, who's our Director of Regulatory Affairs from Fenestration Canada. Most people, I'm sure, know Al. And then MacNeil's going to have a presentation and chat with Al. Gregory is the Vice President of Practice at the RAIC. He's got a Bachelor of Arts degree. He's an architect by training. He's published many articles throughout the world. Lots of work on the conservation area, and just happy to have him here today along with Steve and have them participate in our committee. So look forward to this session. Thanks.
All right. So I guess I'm up. All right, Hank. I'm gonna do we'll have to get the screen share here in a second.
Well, Steve, you're quick to be off mute, unlike me, so you're ahead of the game.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. I wasn't having a sociable though. Okay, can you see that now?
You can.
Okay, well, I want to talk to you about fenestration compliance in Rothesay and how we deal with these items. So one of the things that for the folks that are not from what we call away, okay, Rothesay is located just outside of St. John, New Brunswick, and we've southern New Brunswick with population of 12,000, about 48 square kilometers, and we're mostly residential apartment buildings with some commercial use. So that's what complies Rothesay. So it gives you an idea where we're at. Now, I had to bring the dogs back. The Rothesay's approach for code compliance, we use a proactive along with some sprinkling of education in there. And we work generally as a team approach. In a building for a building permit for required for new construction or fenestration replacement. So we require a building permit for those items. We do the pre-building permit requirements. We look for a non-price quote sheet, which is required with energy and NAFs, a hard copy or email. I generally get it mostly emailed to me from the various distributors. And then along with the plans, you'll find that a fenestration, the installation details have got to be shown on the plans and how you're going to install that on your set of plans. And then during the construction phase, right, I generally try to get installation as per code. I'm pushing about 90% code compliant, and head flashings with end dams have to be installed. And then I can review the fenestration labels. Some of the Rothesay's education that we've done fenestration advisories, and I can show you an example of that. Consumers information, presentations to building officials, videos on installation requirements, and working in the field with contractors on NAFS education and installation. So this is our information flyer for the public, and that'll give us the performance requirements for our local area, and that'll give you also the open and closed drains that you need to know, labeling information, flashing requirements, and then I've got a little bit of a QR so that it'll hook you right over to Fenestration Canada if you need to, or some generally just general information. Okay, why do I ask for before the permit? That's the biggest question I get. And it's simple. I address any concerns prior to the job order or job installation. And for the building inspectors, that they need to realize that this is a legal document that goes in their file that says, I will be putting in this type of fenestration, and it's no different than a floor and roof layout or a set of plans. So that's why we ask for it. And sometimes an inspector may not be able to go out in the field and look at the labels. And it's actually, that's the best approach that I've found, because the last thing that as a building inspector and a contractor, we don't need to be sitting at a job site arguing whether that window has to come out or does it meet or not. So this way we address them up front. Okay, what I'm looking for in a higher thing is I'm looking for the energy, U value, ER, performance grade for the terrain and area, water penetration, and tested size. Okay, just generally what you'd find on the label. I've used, as I said before, you got 4 fingers, so you can generally, use that. It's fairly simple. Once again, with the performance end of it, yes, you can get down into different types of fenestrations, but for the higher end of it, that's pretty well what I'm kind of leaning towards. Okay, the issues are, some of the issues on the quote sheets that I find, okay, the combination windows are still a bit of a headache at times because some manufacturers, some don't have ratings for mullions. I'm finding that oversized windows, yes, it's nice to sell a fenestration, but if it's a huge window that's not been tested, that seems to be an issue that pops up. Again, the tested size, that pops up. And the other one that I found kind of unique, where you get a manufacturer or a distributor that sells 2 or 3 manufacturers' products, sometimes they don't put on whose window it is or door. And that leaves me to guessing, okay, who do I call? So that's sometimes a bit of a headache. And when I look at a quote sheet, it's hard to tell on a fenestration. If you look at this picture, I can't tell if that's a composite or a combination window, right? And that's common what I see there, because if I don't see the overall rating, then I don't know which it is, okay? But I've able to figure it out, words like T-mullion, I can generally figure out that's a composite window, right? And so then other manufacturers, which are good, they put overall rating, then I know it's a combination. So maybe a better graphics, I don't know, but these things are the ones that seem to pop up. And the other one that pops up, which I see a lot, is water penetrations for doors. As you can see here, this one here has a 260. That doesn't make it in for this local area. So again, we have to go back and have that conversation and saying, okay, you need to get that water penetration. And so as I say to a contractor, they're taking out a door out of a building that leaks, and that yet they want to put another one back in that may leak because of the water penetration. So that's a little bit part of the education and with the contractors. Okay, fenestration distributors. They need to read the quote sheets, okay, and understand the NFRC energy requirements. Supply that to the consumer and go over, review it with them, okay. And I would also say that you can give that to the contractor and say, here's your sheet. Please give that to the building inspector, and because they may need it for his permit. Okay, if the NAFS is not on the quote sheet, it may have to go back to the manufacturer, and because there's probably an issue with it. And most likely, if it's not on the quote sheet, it won't show up on the label. So the other thing that is a little red flag when you get these quote sheets, I see that at times is not evaluated for NAFS or missing the app information. Well, to me, if I'm selling the product, that would be a red flag. Okay, now the Atlantic fenestration manufacturers are doing a good job. We've been down this road for a number of years, and they're really good with getting their quote sheets, their labeling, and fielding questions. Okay, yes, there's room for improvement. There always is, but most cases, the fenestrations and the information that's coming to this town, it isn't as big a struggle as it used to be. Okay, now the consumers and the energy advisors, what I find frustrating is that they only focus on the energy or the Energy Star or the triple pane windows. And that's where their focus is. And the consumers are depending on the salesperson, right? Most cases, because at the end of the day is they put their trust into the salesperson, right? And when you get a new home drawing that's done by an architect or a designer, the NAFS ratings are not on the drawings. They just say, windows by others, I guess is what I'd look at. And when I talk to consumers, they're shocked that you can buy a window or door in fenestration in Canada that's not been tested. And they just say, what do you mean? Now, the other one I've got here is a bit of a side thing is when I go to the job site, there's a confusing label which confuses the consumers. I say, well, your fenestration doesn't meet. We'll say, why not? Well, they say, right there, it says it's certified, but they don't realize it is certified for energy only. So that is a bit of what I call a confusing label on a fenestration. Okay, why is code compliant key? Okay, I've taken this morning. We got -18 or -22. Okay, in this area, and this afternoon it's going to rain. Okay, in most cases it's going to rain sideways. So we go from extreme cold to the rain, and that's why Atlantic fenestrations need to be code compliant and bulletproof pretty well. So, and that's why the teamwork is important with manufacturers, window distributors, architects, house designers, building officials, and consumers. So that's what I've got. And if there's any questions, we'll take it away.
Thanks, Steve.
We do have a question. I don't know if you guys see it.
Okay. I can't see it, but just hang on.
I can read it for you.
Oh, sure.
Sheriff's asking, basically saying, when you have mixed opening type within the elevation, for example, SH next to PIC. Well, yeah, you'll have to read this because there's a lot of abbreviations here. But
that might be a Terry question there. Hang on.
Hang on, I'll jump in and help you out here.
I'm trying to translate as I go, but I'm missing some part of it.
You'll get there eventually.
Oh, this is question and answer. Hang on here.
This is from Sharif at Open Janela. It says, when you have a mixed opening type within an elevation, for example, a single hung next to a picture, where the picture has a higher U value, for example, than the single hung, which U value should be present? This gets more complicated if it's frame divided by T millions instead of two separate frames. My experience has been that the poorer U value is the one that's referenced for the entire product.
Yes. Yeah.
I might be on the trivia tomorrow night.
Yeah,
that could be.
I don't necessarily have a question, but a comment for Steve and the group and the discussion today is, here in Atlantic Canada, much like British Columbia, we are in lots of discussion about NAFs, labeling, and the trying to educate the different parts of the channel, whether it's the fabricator, dealer, the contractor, renovator, consumer, has been tough. So one of the discussions, and we've had Steve on our committee and Greg on our committee, is we've chatted about is this the gate that we need to support, which is at the the building official level. Steve can tell you there's been windows and doors installed in Atlantic Canada that have had to be removed because they didn't meet the building code. And I know that's probably different than Central Canada, the prairies, but I'm sure similar things are happening in BC. And this is not an uncommon occurrence where products are installed and don't meet the building code. And that's a disaster for everybody at that point. So again, here in Atlantic Canada, it's on the forefront of what we're trying to do. It is the building code. Is it simple? No, but it is the building code. So we have to follow it, and window doors must meet the building code in Canada. So I do like the approach that Steve is doing in his jurisdiction, and look for anyone to chime in on that.
Well, Kevin, I don't understand, like I wrestle with why the building inspectors are not pushing this, because again, as my process is fairly easy, straightforward. I'll give you, they'll send me in email me the quote sheet, not a problem. I got 4 fingers, it takes me a few minutes to roll through it. Generally, there's not an issue. And then it comes down to a point of liability for building inspectors. Like, I've done my work, it goes in my file. Okay. And if there's an issue with that building down the road or whatever, yes, these do meet code. So if you're not looking as an inspector, you've opened that liability window open for those guys. And it's fairly straightforward. And most of the manufacturers now will send it to you easy.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that what Kevin said. First off, though, I'd like to thank Steve for his participation. Having him and bringing his point of view has been really helpful to understand what the challenges are for the building officials. Also, Steve has just become the very first official building official that is a Fenestration Canada member. So thank you very much for your support, Steve. We're gonna rely on you as we reach out to the rest of them.
Yeah, but That doesn't mean I'm going to be easy on you.
Yeah. Okay. I don't sell in your area, so that doesn't matter to me. No, I think your approach is really good. And I think that there can be a lot learned from other jurisdictions to follow that same methodology where they're dealing with the challenge well ahead of before it becomes a problem. Because we all know, putting product out there without it being compliant. And if you happen to get a building official that's going to check it, that's a much bigger problem, after you've built and installed the product than if it's caught before anything's fabricated. So love your approach. I think you're on the right track, and we're gonna lean on you to expand as best we can.
One thing I'd like to mention to you guys is that what frustrates me as a building inspector, I see all these energy advisors, the gurus are out there talking, and they keep chatting and they're saying, well, you got to go with triple, you got to go this, and they've got to change the dialogue, because the fenestration is more than just the triple. To me, is more than just a triple pane glass. It's a whole meal deal type of thing. And when we get some of the people that the consumers are listening to, that are chatting and they're saying, got to go with a triple, and they're forgetting all about it. It's great to have a triple pane window, but if the air leaks around the glass, or if it's not holding up, then you got an issue.
Yeah, it's to your point, Steve, we do see a lot of confusion over the energy rating label and the NAFS label. And for, not only us, but other members in Atlantic Canada have pushed hard to educate the market on NAFS, but it's just, it's pushing a rock uphill. It's a bit of a complicated situation. And I think having a gate in the process, like I said, at your level, that can capture it. Obviously, if you can get a permit at the design stage and make sure you meet the building code, that's, to me, a great process.
I just like to add too, Steve, that something you didn't touch on is the evolution of this process, right? Steve didn't show up one day and this is how he was doing things. He really developed this process with really all the manufacturers, helped us understand his perspective. And, we have what we have today, and it was a real cohesive effort. And we had the privilege of talking to Steve and a couple of his counterparts in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland last year, Kevin, myself, and some of the other FenCan members. And it was very interesting, how they were saying, look, we're the last line of defense for the consumers, and everyone has their part to play in the chain. And that was really my key takeaway out of those discussions was, Steve and his counterparts throughout the country they're not the police officers. They're not the be all end all. They're there trying to protect the consumer, which is what we should be doing as well. So, it's been a very interesting evolution, and Steve is really, as he was saying yesterday, kind of kicked the can down a little bit as we just got better and better and better. And we are where we are today. And I think anyone can take this proactive approach. We don't have to be running to sites and auditing. To Steve's point, he audits from time to time when he needs to, just to make sure things are getting labeled properly. But this approach where we're looking at the quotes right at the build or planning stage, right at the building permit stage, that's the way to do it. It's very, very proactive. So kudos to you, Steve. Well done.
Thank you. Is there any questions there that we've got?
Steve, you meant, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, I'm going to say, first of all, as an architect, I have to applaud the approach you've taken. There are far too many building inspectors, to be frank with you, who skirt the responsibility. And I think what you've done is admirable. I'm also intrigued, though. How do you find that the construction industry as a whole is actually, the contractors are actually fully cognizant of the building code?
Well, as far as the overall code, probably not. But when we talk about fenestrations with the contractor, is that I don't think any contractor wants to put a product in that's not code compliant. Mm-hmm. They may not know the code, but they know that so I've got contractors I've worked with, and they said, before they put the order in and worry about it later. Well, now they're worrying about it ahead of time. They're saying, mm-hmm. Okay, I get quote sheets a month ahead before even the permit application, just to make sure that the guys say, okay, what do you think? Is this one going to work? type of thing, and they're not ordering until the boxes get ticked off, which is great, you know, and that's where the contractors are leaning heavily on the sales guys to make sure that it's code compliant, right? They may not know, do they want to know about the NAFS requirements, all that? They just want to know, what numbers do I have to make sure that I'm giving the customer a code compliant product.
Thank you.
You know, Steve, you mentioned having liability for, let's say, a building not complying with code. I think in some jurisdictions, the building officials are actually shielded by legislation that they're not responsible. You know, they can't be sued for non-compliance. And some of them feel that they have so many things they're responsible for, they can't check off everything. And so I get the impression that, the question of liability might vary very much from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I don't know that it's that it's an issue everywhere that building officials feel that sense that they are the last line of defense.
Well, I think that the building inspector would be looking at, let's just take headers and lintels for doors, those things, we would look at those as a role. We'd make sure that the foundations or footings are in there. So the fenestrations would be no different in the process. And yes, they may be shielded from liability, but they're not shielded from public opinion. Somebody has a house that's their fenestration's not working, and next thing you know, they're into social media about how the building inspector didn't do their job. That goes a long way. So you have to make sure that you're covered. Sure, there's things that you're going to miss and not get, but as long as you look at it and do the best that you can, nobody's going to fault you for that.
You guys certainly have the harshest climate from that point of view. I think the highest driving wind pressures in Canada are in Atlantic Canada. So you've got that harshest climate, and the rain in BC is not as horizontal as it is in Atlantic Canada. Well,
installation is the other big challenge that I've been working on. That's moving a rock up a hill, but we're getting there. Again, as I said, I'm 90% there, it's getting there. It's slowly educating. So when I get a new contractor, somebody from not in the area, we have that conversation. How are you putting your windows in, right? And so that I'm not there. Like, I think before Christmas, it was the first time in a long while I'd ever had a house full of windows taken out, right? Because they didn't listen. They started putting windows in without having that chat with Steve. And next thing I know, they're not all installed, correctly. So they had to come out. And at the end of the day, the guy learned, he understands, and he appreciated the road down, the path down there, even though it was a hard one for him. But again, the installation is another critical component of this fenestration.
Oh, it certainly is. And I think nothing gets the attention of the building community more than removing product, non-compliant product from a home and having to redo it. It kind of alerts people to the fact that somebody cares here and we better be careful.
Well, I've got another contractor that's doing windows in next week, and I think I'm going down there and we're going to spend a couple hours with him on it. And he's give you an example, like the backer rod. He said, well, now where do I get that? Right? Type of thing. So they just don't know. But again, once he gets his installation done, he'll be down the road. He may go to another jurisdiction, but he'll carry that with him.
That's for sure.
Okay.
So now to I don't know if Kevin, you wanted to take over, or Greg Dickie, one of the two. To keep going.
There's still a question in the Q&A at the moment.
Yeah. Sheriff says NFRC does not have that requirement. So NAFS is in a way more trustworthy than NFRC. If so, that would be a good selling point for Canadian products. So that's more of a comment.
Yeah, I think this person might be confused about energy labels as opposed to, when we talk about NAFs, we're really talking about structural, air, and water performance. You know, do the windows have the wind load resistance to handle the wind pressures on them? Are they airtight? Have they passed the air leakage requirements of the test standards? And what is their water penetration resistance? That's really the main reason that we have the NAF standard, is to make sure that the windows are physically performing, essentially keep the weather out, keep the walls dry. That's the job. And then the energy performance is, are we also minimizing energy transmission through the windows? So, just for the benefit of this questioner, NFRC is the American Energy Certification Program. It's the National Fenestration Rating Council, and the American Energy Performance labels have that NFRC mark on them. And a lot of Canadian manufacturers certify through NFRC because they're selling in both countries, US and Canada. But not all energy labels have the NFRC mark on them. And that mark is completely separate from the subject Steve's talking about, which is that structural airtightness and water penetration resistance aspect of windows. And arguably in Atlantic Canada, this is more critical than anywhere else because your design pressures are easily, twice that of what you'd be facing in Toronto, for example. So it's clearly has to be, a more serious concern based on the environment that you're in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Al. I think what Steve has presentation was really, as Greg mentioned, a culmination of this. You just don't push a button and make it happen. It's been years of living the sideways rain down here, and the NAFs, and the other important criteria is installation. So we continue to work at that. Great presentation, Steve. Really,
Thank you.
I think at the end of the day, what resonates with me is that the last thing you want to have is taking product out of a house because there was a preemptive step somewhere along the way, and that's what we're seeing more and more of that here in Atlantic Canada, and more building officials buying into this process. So it's a learning curve that we're further along here in Atlantic Canada, and I hope today's session helped people in other jurisdictions. So moving along, we'll jump into the second part of our session here, which is a fireside chat between Al Jaugelis, our Director of Regulatory Affairs at Fenestration Canada, and Gregory MacNeil, who's an architect by training, ran his own business for years. Now is the Vice President of Practice at the RAIC, and has got a tremendous amount of education training, and has been published many papers, and we welcome Gregory here. As I mentioned earlier, Gregory and Steve, we had the benefit of them having on our committee and getting some really good perspective from the stakeholders area. So I'll turn it over to Gregory and Al, and look forward to this fireside chat.
Well, Al, I hope you stoked up the fire.
Pardon?
The fire is stoked.
Oh,
The
I see.
fire
Right.
stoked,
Yes. Yeah. It's a fireside chat missing the fire. There's
Missing
no
the
log in
fire.
there's no log in the fire behind me here, but there's no fireplace either. But Greg, we so much appreciate you, your involvement at Fenestration Canada. You're helping to bring a perspective, really to help us understand how to reach out to the architectural community. And one of the things that in the past, I remember, being involved in doing education, trying to educate architects about the NAF standard, in British Columbia here. And it was always difficult, it seemed like, to get their attention. There was other priorities that were more important than a new standard for testing windows, doors, and skylights. And, but then again, times change, and also sometimes it's sometimes maybe it's presenting the message in a way that the audience actually wants, needs to hear it. In other words, is there a way to address the questions the architect may have rather than us telling the architect what we think they need to know? So,
yeah, I think the architect's time, there's a couple of things happening. We used to think about an architect when they put a fee into a project, it would be price, quality, and service. Now it's price, quality, service, and speed. So an architect now is actually expected to deliver everything super fast. And their time has become incredibly compressed in their office space. So getting even time with an architect today, I would say, is becoming a challenge for manufacturers. And it's partially that our workload has increased on every single project due to environmental aspects of the jobs, et cetera. So I think it's important for all industries to understand that when they're dealing with an architect, the information now has to be much more succinctly delivered. There's not a lot of time to have a cup of coffee in my office anymore. And that has changed the way we look at the product. We also have to understand that an architect has different languages of dialogue or different levels of dialogue. There's a drawing language they work with every day. There's a computer language they work with every day. And then there's a multitude of dialogues they have to have with the client, who is more and more relying on the internet for their information. And so the architect has to make sure that their dialogue is above what the internet information is providing. There's a dialogue, certainly with building code officials, much more involved dialogue. And then there's a new dialogue, which we've really only started to, I think, fully explore in the last decade to 2 decades. Certainly most practices, I'm going to say, within the last 5 years. I've been fortunate to be exploring it since about the early 90s. And that's the dialogue we have now with our computers and internally in the office. And those computers, they become a laboratory now. So all the information that we require on the windows can be inputted into that computer to generate within 30 seconds an energy breakdown of the building. So I think those are the key things you have to think about when you're dealing with architects today. There's different levels of language and different levels of dialogue.
And, certainly some of the discussions you and I have had have helped to help me to appreciate what that is. And I think, could you tell us more about that this morning?
The dialogue that you and I have had, Al?
No, well, I guess what is it, a little bit more about what the architect wants to know or needs to know.
Well, it's interesting. I will go back 30, 40 years ago, and the architect needed to know really if it was double glazed or single glazed, or if there was a gas infill, because they really selected between wood and maybe a vinyl window. Today, they need to know all the U factors. They need to know all the foils, because they have to push all of that into the computer system. Because as we're designing, which I'll show later in my presentation, as we're designing, the computer is modeling in schematic design. So we have to have all of that information. I think the other thing that's important for architects today, the window industry has to step up. The NAFS document is simply too big a document for an architect to read and understand. I hate to say that, but it's gotten too complicated.
It has, and largely, I think if you compare the NAFS document to the former Canadian standard, the A440,
mm-hmm.
It's about 4 times longer, and I would say the main reason it's such a long and complicated document is because the American industry has developed this concept of performance classes,
mm-hmm.
and they have come up with these classes in order to sort of stratify products into sort of different categories. And so they've created a whole bunch of rules about what does it take to get into one of these categories? What are the different test methods and parameters that you need in order to classify these products into one of these 4 performance classes? And so this now requires someone to explain what is a performance class. Why should you choose one class over another? And honestly, if you look at the NAF standard, there's no clear explanation of what a performance class is. You ask 7 people and you'll get 8 answers, and none of them will be right, because people just make stuff up to explain what they don't really fully understand. And it's a problem with the standard that it itself does not clearly tell you, here's what the performance class is, and here's how you choose a performance class. And honestly, that's what makes it such a long and complicated document. And it's gotten worse because they decided to reorganize the product around segregating the lower classes from the upper classes. You know, and it's you know, you could argue that this is kind of a marketing concept, right? That we now have to stratify products in these categories. But, you know, is it marketing, or is it, you know, functionality? In a way, it's both. But the lack of a clear definition of it is a problem. And, you know, I've written 2 blog articles on the Fenestration Canada blog about this, you know, trying to help people understand what is behind the concept, and to help them understand, you have to explain some of the testing that goes into it, so that you understand that these classes are tested to a much tougher standard than the lower classes. But again, you know, it's sort of after the fact, somebody trying to explain, here's why these categories exist and here's how you should use them, when the standard itself does not make that clear.
Yeah. There's something interesting you said in there for me, is that you said when you explained this to 6 or 7 or 8 architects. I found that to be a very interesting comment, because if I look at the profession in Canada, 80% of all architects are working for small or micro-sized, small, medium-sized firms. Those firms, if I take the medium-sized firm, it's somewhere between 19 and 50 personnel. So if you go to the micro-sized and small firms, just getting them 7 people, explaining it to 7 people in the office and getting them to all understand simultaneously is a tough task. And I'm going to say, yeah, and I'm going to say that, you know, that's becoming the problem with the codes. They're becoming very complicated for large firms and medium-sized firms. They can assign a specialist now, one architect or an engineer, just to deal with windows, just to deal with building enclosure, just to deal with roofing. And but for the smaller firms, which are doing a lot of the construction, especially in residential, they are pressed to understand all of it, to really take the time to get to know the codes. They're certainly capable of understanding them, and they're certainly capable of understanding the tiered approach, but it's that time factor. And the codes, for that reason, are viewed to be just too complicated.
And I mean, the reality is, though, that you might say, I think you could say the technical side of architecture has, you know, just exploded in complexity, right? Yes. Over, let's say, 2 decades, if not a shorter time frame. And that's got to be a huge challenge, because, you know, in architecture school, you're learning more about design and process and things like that than you are about the technology of construction. And yet the codes keep getting more complicated, more elaborate. And of course, we're trying to design more sophisticated building enclosures to solve more sophisticated problems, you know, such as, you know, energy performance and whatnot. So, so yes, there's a huge amount of complexity that is now part of everyday life for everyone in the industry.
Yeah. I think in Atlantic Canada, they've identified well over 40 microclimates, which is, you know, which is an interesting. That's quite a few. I mean, when you start thinking about just say one province and say it has 8 or 10 microclimates in it, that's a daunting task.
You know? I think, Gregory, we had all those last week.
Did you? Yeah, I think we did. in one location.
Well, yeah. So you have a few slides there, Gregory?
Pardon?
You had some slides you were going to take a look at, or?
Yeah, I was going to show you a presentation I did, and I was going to show you a few things from the architect's perspective about buildings and windows in general. And I'm interested personally right now in there's a couple of things I'm interested. I'm interested in the level of dialogue that an architect is expected to have. And it's something that's going to become a national issue if it is not already. I'm also interested in the notion of complexity versus simplicity and getting those definitions sort of defined. So this is a presentation. I'm just going to flip over here and share. Let's just do the share thing down here. So I don't know if we had the full screen up.
Got it.
Simplicity equals sanity. So this is a talk I gave, which I pulled out of the drawer. It's a talk I gave, I believe, back in 2015 when I first met Kevin at the Fenestration Canada conference in Halifax. Is that correct, Kevin? 2015 or 2016? Oh, Kevin's muted.
Yeah, we first met in Vancouver, but I think this presentation was either Vancouver, Halifax. But yes.
Yeah, it was in that time zone. I was asked to give a 15-minute discussion on the NAFS document. And in preparation for that, I sat down and I read the entire NAFS document 3 times. And I decided that there was no way that you could possibly give a 15-minute or an hour and a half presentation on the NAFS document and include it all. So I came to the conference with this concept of simplicity equals sanity. And if you look at this photograph here, I want you to ignore that. Like, we're gonna look at windows today, but I want you to ignore the windows in the background. What I was actually interested in was the car, not the building with the windows, but the car, and not even the car window. What I was interested in the car for is because it had no lines of code in it. It was a simple Model T. There was no computer chip in it. You didn't have to write any lines of code for it to operate. And I began to compare that with the modern automobile of about the 2017, 15 era, the Audi, which was apparently the top of the line as far as performance and computer chips. Beautiful automobile, very sleek, much more sophisticated, obviously, than the Model T. And it takes 200 million lines of code to operate that automobile, to drive it. Now, 200 million lines of code, that's a pile of code. Audi has actually recently laid off 10,000 employees because they can't get computer chips to build their cars. They're that reliant. The airplane, as we look at Bedeck, Nova Scotia, and Alexander Graham Bell, the Silver Dart. That's also a product that had no computer chip in it, no lines of code. The Airbus, on the other hand, great fenestration product on it, can withstand 600 miles of wind, 30, 40,000 feet, tremendous temperature ranges within that fenestration product. But that needs 7 million lines of code. It actually needs less than the Audi because, of course, when the Audi's code doesn't work, it just goes to the garage. When the code doesn't work on the Airbus, it falls out of the sky. The dishwasher was the other product I looked at. The dishwasher, to me, is a very fascinating product because it is essentially a fenestration product. Just like the fenestration industry, there are multiple manufacturers. They all offer different features and benefits. And I will tell you honestly, if you attempt to sit down and analyze them all, you'll probably go insane, just like you would with all the codes today. If you want to have a disagreement with your significant other, go buy a dishwasher and start sorting through the features. I don't know how many lines of code are in a dishwasher, to be honest. I suspect, though, that it's somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of lines of code to get through basic dishwashing that we used to do with a cloth and some liquid soap. If you look at the breakdown of a dishwasher, quite a collection of parts. But then if we look down at the dishwasher versus the window also starts to get very complicated today. When you actually break a window down into all the little parts that go into manufacturing it, there's a significant number of parts. And in one manufacturer I dealt with, they had 127 changes in 1 year to the parts. And if you just think about that, tracking a product, which product came out of the factory when, had a different collection than the ones the week following. The window industry is like the dishwasher. The dishwasher is a very sophisticated way of separating two completely different environments, just as the window is a very sophisticated way of separating two different environments. If you look at the temperature ranges in a dishwasher, they're quite high. There's steam, there's water pressure, there's a whole range of factors, and it has to keep it out from the kitchen floor. Likewise, you don't want the environment of the kitchen moving into the dishwasher because it ceases to wash the dishes. Quite a neat product. Gasketing everything just like a window, glass like a window. That's a traditional window. I mean, this is the Model T of windows in a sense. But even this window, this is one that I designed, it had over 800 separate individual CNC parts. Each of those parts required its own data file, its own tooling path, and its own tool cutter. It also required laser scanning on site to get the opening correct. We measured. We were expected to deliver that window with 1/8 inch tolerance around the stone, which we did. That's a very sophisticated window, even though in reality, it's just simply one piece of a series of blocks of wood glued together. It's interesting on the labeling for that window. That's the labeling. There's no NAFS label with that one. It's a whole series of hand signatures, just like they did in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century. No lines of code on that one. Well, that's not really true. There's quite a few lines of code on that one, not on the actual product, but on the path to getting there. Tremendous amount of code had to go into that to program the CNC machine. Label, of course, these are the modern labels. The people that actually, I think, do the best labeling, it's not the window and door industry, it's the automobile industry. They do a tremendous job of labeling because they make it easy for the consumer to understand. They make it easy for everybody to understand. They have a website to make it easy to understand. The window and door industry, if we go back and then we look at this one, and then we go back 2 steps, the economy, the automobile industry gets really good because it tells you how much you're going to pay. It tells you a lot of information that the consumer is interested in and the government's interested in. But if we go to this one, this is a fairly specific label that I would say the consumer and even the architects and engineers are somewhat challenged to understand. So I think the window and door industry has to come along a little bit. But we look at that window and we say, well, the label looks very, very simple in some formats, but we think about the testing that goes involved with the arriving to that label or arriving at it. What's interesting for me is the testing of the window is no less complicated than the lines of code in my software that's going to test the energy of a building. Because essentially my software is doing the exact same thing, but just at a slightly different level or language or dialogue. It's interesting that we're attempting to make the enclosure of the building as sophisticated as the window. And I'm going to say the window is probably the most sophisticated component of a wall today. I'm very impressed by the fact that Fenestration Canada has produced a calculator for NAFS that's regional specific. I think that's fantastic and a first step. But I think even that has to be brought down to a level that it fits onto a smart device. And it has to have more information with it. It has to deal with the glazing options for the different facades of the building. So simplicity is kind of what I'm after as an architect. There's also an issue of what we call the complicated problem. So a complicated problem is a little different than a complex problem. A complicated problem is a problem that you don't actually know how to solve. Therefore, it's complicated. A complex problem is a problem that you are capable of solving because you can understand the complexity of it. And that's where we have a difference in dialogue. So for a lot of people, problems that architects solve, we call them a complex problem because we're capable of solving it. Problems that we can't solve, we call a complex problem. And that holds true for everybody in every profession in life. The building inspector has the same thing to deal with between what's complicated and complex. And I applaud Mr. Nason for actually trying to get at the complex problem and make it simple for the building contractor. So we look for simple solutions because that's the ones we can handle easily. We look for simplicity. Now I'm going to show you something that's a little different. Now, this is what I'm going to call the most rudimentary floor plan I could whip up this morning in about 11 minutes flat to do this entire series of slides. Your basic 4-square house. Now, if we look at these 4 walls, they take load, they take shear force, which is coming from the wind on the walls of the exterior walls of the building, etc. We've heard a lot of people in the world today, they want a house designed or a building with an open concept. So let's remove the walls. And so let's look at that when we remove the walls. Now, all of a sudden, the exterior walls have to absorb all the shear and load capacity that was taken out of those walls from the interior. Now we're going to go to the next level, which is the windows. Let's make the windows bigger. Everybody likes big windows. Now we've got no wall left. So now all of a sudden for the architect, the project becomes a whole lot more complex. I need a special software package. I need engineers on board for a simple residential house to meet code. So when somebody comes into, the salesperson comes in and says, you need bigger windows. Some architects are going to look at it like I would say, well, there's going to reach a certain point where you're complicating my work a whole lot. And I'm not going to necessarily be interested in that one. The windows are interesting and the computer is interesting. So I'll put a tree in next to the little building. And if you look at it very carefully, you'll see there's a shadow from the tree derived onto the floor plate of that building. Well, that shadow, of course, is calculated from the sun at a given point in time on a given GPS or location on the earth. That location is also, besides calculating the shadow, it's also going to calculate the solar heat gain picked up from the windows. And what's interesting about the software is that's a coniferous tree, but if I put a deciduous there, the heat gain calculator will compensate for the fact it has no leaves in the winter. It will calculate not only the solar heat gain of the windows, but it's going to calculate the heating factor for that entire building. And so if we look at environmental settings that an architect sets today, it's the longitude and latitude, thermal gradients. We download the weather systems, climate data from all over the world for a specific site, and it is site specific. I can even plug into the software the exposure of each side to wind. So there's actually quite a bit of stuff I can plug into the software. The calculations that we use for environmental conditions or energy consumption of a building today, they're based on a minute by minute calculation. So it calculates for every minute of every hour of every day of every week of every month of every year, and it does it in 30 seconds. So if I have the wrong U value for a window, all of a sudden my calculations are way off on the building. So there's another level of sophistication of dialogue that I need to have now with the window manufacturer and the fenestration industry, and that is, what exactly does this window perform like? Because I have to log that into the computer. And my computer will calculate the frame based on its material. It will calculate the glazing. It will calculate the separation around the clear space around the window, rough opening versus size of the frame. It'll calculate a whole bunch of different things. And I want to have all that data up front from the manufacturer. And if I go back to the NAFs, and of course I have to calculate out and figure out what glazing systems I'm putting on the north and south versus the east and the west facades of the building, what my options are. So when I go back and I look at what a window manufacturer brings me today, the color is the least interesting. The color of the glass is probably the least interesting. It's all the other data of that window that I have to punch into the computer to make my job efficient. So it's about, for us, it's becoming what different varieties of dialogue and different languages do we communicate in? And I'm just going to leave it at that.
It's a great presentation, Greg. We are almost out of time, I think.
Yeah.
Correct me, Al, if I'm not right there, but there is a question I think is relevant to this, is there a need for a tutorial on NAFs for architects? And I think that kind of leads into a question or just, quick summary, Al and Gregory, of what our plans are with Fenestration Canada and the RAIC to sort of work together to sort of maybe answer that question. Al, I'll leave it with you.
To your question, Kevin, I'm actually working on such a presentation at the moment. Just before Christmas, RAIC, announced their conference this year and asked for presentations. And we applied for a presentation, were awarded a presentation. And so I am going to try to give Gregory exactly what he wants in the presentation we're working on for the spring conference, RAIC spring conference. And the dialogue with Greg has been very helpful here. So we'll see how close we can get to giving Greg what he wants, because I'd like to continue this dialogue with him. Simple is good, but you want simple in a complicated world, and where simplicity is not often to be found. So yes, you want simple, I get it. Is simple the answer? Well, maybe we can do a lot to simplify the big issues and the big decisions. But I think there's a lot more to explore here. Which I'm looking forward to do in future conversations with Greg. Good. But yes, we're working on making NAV simple for architects in the upcoming RAIC conference.
And we're very pleased that he's doing that.
Greg, I see that it's a good example why you want to hire an architect, right? Because a lot of times, as we see here in the building end of it, that a lot of houses are not done by architects. So what happens is that the review of the fenestrations and the sight lines and all that stuff is not done. It's just generally a pretty picture and enough to get you out the door. And the fenestration items are left to the manufacturers. And, again, they would even know where to find the NAFS documents in a lot of cases. So, there is value into hiring the architect firms, and that would make my job a little easier in some cases. And the other thing, Greg, I understand, because we have a lot of small architectural firms around, and there's just too many pieces of puzzle, for a larger project for a small firm to get their head wrapped around the NAF stuff. And, I see that too, because the small firms on small apartment buildings or small houses generally lean onto the manufacturers because they're just too overwhelmed. And the other area, just one more in closing, is that I see that besides the fenestration, is that the architects have had some buildings done by architectural firms where the installation of the product will lead to some problems down the road. And I think that's as you said, it is a complex thing to put a fenestration in a building, and there needs to be some methodology on that and a detailed drawing so that the projects can have that correct installation, whether it's commercial or whether it's a single family home.
Yeah, the roofing industry is interesting in the commercial roofing, because they now have they've had for a number of years. They obviously rely on factory installation, factory trained installers and
Yes.
factory supplied inspectors. If you look at the big companies, they tend to go that way because they're putting a warranty on it.
Well, what I found, Greg, though, is that when you get a bigger project design and the company that's doing it, you know, it doesn't matter what project they are, they'll put that fenestration in there upside down.
Yeah.
If the drawings say that, because that's what the drawings say. So, you know, you can have all the factory trained guys, but common sense will leave the project when they look at the drawing and the guys say, put it in upside down or no drainage at the bottom. And I've seen that, you know, where you know, and you had challenged, you know, you have to challenge them.
Yeah, there's a speed component now, as I mentioned, in the profession. And that is everybody's looking for the drawing super quick.
Well, I think it's a common sense more than anything, you know, like you wouldn't put a fenestration in upside down or not draining it, but I've seen people do that and it says, well, this is the way the drawings go, right?
Yeah, no, that happens. There's no question about it.
There you go. That's 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, listen, Gregory, Steve, great presentation, great feedback. I'll remember the next time I get on a plane, I will think that it has less lines of code than a very complicated automobile. So it doesn't follow there. So I'll be thankful for that they made it a little more simple, complex, but simple.
Yeah.
Al, thanks for your time. And I don't know if there's Stefan, if you're going to close things off for us.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you to everyone today again, and to our sponsors, Rothesay and OpenGenella. So talk to you soon. We have another presentation this afternoon with the Quebec chapter, and we have 2 more presentations tomorrow, starting with the Prairies, and then we have BC, and right after that we have trivia. So we do invite you to participate to the trivia tomorrow at I think it's at 4 Eastern time. So see you tomorrow. Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a
you.
nice day now, guys.
Take care.